So, Hotel. Welcome to Journey in the Self. I'm your host, Sarah. So today there's going to be a number of things that I want to tackle. And for those who tuned in before, we know that our primary focus of Journey in the Self is just that. It's a journey into ourselves, that we identify who we truly are as spiritual beings. And that is the true purpose of our human experience. Indeed, we are spiritual beings having a human or physical experience here in this realm. And the purpose of our existence is to be able to return to our true state of being, our spiritual being able to attain a level of consciousness to where we are in full realization of who we are as spiritual beings. Our eyes being fully awakened and being illuminated into that consciousness that we establish ourselves as gods on earth. So many people will misunderstand the different teachings about our beingness and will consider themselves to be gods without putting in the work to get to that level. But it does require work. And it has been that in remote times, sages of in different areas of the world, from different cultures, have engaged in practices where they have attained to that level and have explained and codified how they did so, basically putting together a roadmap of instructions for us to be able to follow in order to be able to attain to that level. And when times have turned for the worse in the course of the cycles of time in humanity, avatars have appeared on the face of the earth, avatars being individualized aspects of God who have taken human form to help humanity find its way, and those who are interested in being able to learn how to return to their state of oneness with spirit have done so. And so they've left us with those instructions in the various forms of spiritual and religious texts. And I'll make the point that was the purpose of original purpose of all the religious teachings. It was to help us to be able to find our way back to our innate and natural state. Now, just like everything else, things can be abused. Just in the same way that we saw how devastating the fire in Maui, in Lahaina, was, that fire can be extremely destructive. But in the same way, fire used properly can provide us warmth, light, can help us to cook delicious food. And so it would be erroneous and unwise to draw the conclusion that fire is destructive just based upon the experience of seeing fire destroy. So in the same way, it's fallacious to draw the conclusion that religion was created to manipulate and control people, because it was not. That said, however, people have taken the opportunity to use religion for that purpose, to manipulate and control people, and have altered it to achieve those objectives. But that was not the original intent and purpose of it. And I'll take issue with anyone who says that that's the case. And I will also take issue with saying that it's man-made. I'll say it's man-manipulated. Nonetheless, though we are here to primarily with the purpose of finding our way back to our essence, we have lives to live here in this realm. And we are met with various challenges that can distract us from achieving that objective. So, we have, it said that life is a grand drama, and we each have parts to play in it. And so it's not for us to withdraw into spirituality as an escape from dealing with the situations of life. Rather, it is for us to draw upon the knowledge and wisdom gained from studying and applying the spiritual principles to life in order to be able to gain strength to be able to overcome the challenges, both through study and the application and experience of the application of the spiritual principles, both in spiritual practice and then in practical application in life. And as we've gone through different cycles of time, different challenges arise. And we're in a particular cycle of time when challenges are at the extreme level. We are in a darker period where human consciousness and human vibration is at a lower point. And so that type of consciousness predominates and happens to be the predominant control of the systems, both economic, political, and otherwise, that run the planet. So it becomes more challenging for us to navigate and find our way back, and also to carry out our own individual roles in the grand drama. I was talking to someone who I do counseling with, and he was asking me about the origin of different wealth teachings, so to speak, because there are a number of different, and I hate to use the word gurus, but you have self-help teachers, wealth creation type teachers that teach how to manifest this or that, to create wealth, speak things and manifest things into existence and so forth. There's organizations that have been put together to achieve that objective. And all of those things, people, organizations, teachers, self-proclaimed gurus, are not creating anything new. There's nothing new under the sun. These are ancient teachings that have been passed down to us by our ancestors, that have been taken, hidden, and used for the purpose of being able to control wealth, control others, by keeping the information from others so that they can manipulate, control, and hoard things. And so that information is being shared, because we do live in a time when we are being influenced by the energy of the Aquarian age. And so the information that has been hidden from us is now being revealed. And so some of those teachings are being put forth for access by those who seek it. Yet, I contend that what I share with him is that the problem with those wealth creation teachers and organizations is that their focus, which tends to solely be on wealth creation, the accumulation of physical things, attaining happiness through the accumulation of wealth and physical things, is misguided because it will invariably get people deeply entrenched in attachments to those things. It creates heavy attachment. Okay, not to say that spirituality and wealth are incongruent, but the teachings should be prioritized properly. So that's why there's a scripture that says that it is more difficult for it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of heaven. Okay, and that's not to say again that wealth should not be sought, because the accompanying scripture to that is, seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and then all these things will be added unto you. And so it's priority, because if that is not done, then the outcome will be attachment to where people who then now accumulate wealth and physical things will not find happiness, but will instead find misery and suffering, because the attachment will create in them anxiety over the potential of losing what they've accumulated. It'll stimulate greed, anger and depression if they begin to lose any of those type of things. Anxiety will then, overcome them. If someone has more, jealousy, so all negative emotions will arise And they will find that with all that they've accumulated, they have not found happiness. And that's why we've seen so many people who have attained great degrees of wealth are not happy at all. And many of them commit suicide. And certainly don't do anything to benefit society. And so it is important before we begin to seek wealth that we be grounded in spiritual teachings, learn the ability to be able to detach and be at peace with oneself, to find the source of inner peace and happiness, such that one does not seek happiness from the outside, which cannot be attained, but is established in eternal happiness from within, such that they will not be affected by the comings and goings of wealth, comings and goings of people, knowing that everything in the physical realm is subject to change and is not permanent. The only thing that is permanent is spirit. And when we're firmly established there, we have eternal peace and happiness no matter what the circumstances are. So I just wanted to lay that out there as a spiritual message to be mindful of, and to as a precursor into the subject that we want to get into. So it's important that again we establish ourselves in spirit, engage in our practice, so that we are not drawn too heavily into things emotionally that go on around us. Because again, we are living in some really challenging times where a number of things are going on, and there's a lot of things happening to manipulate us, to keep us in a state of fear, to exploit people, to accumulate wealth at the expense of others. Some people feel that is what had happened in Maui, because we've seen parasitic type developers descending upon Lahaina to snap up those properties. Some are suspicious about the circumstances behind that. I can't speak to that. I haven't done much research on that yet, but I'm sure I'll find some information that I can share. Okay, so another thing I wanted to talk about tonight is something that we've talked about before. We spent a lot of time, going into the origin of that situation, and the situation I'm referring to is the pandemic. We spoke about the circumstances that led to it. We talked about Dr. Fauci's role in bringing the pandemic to fruition through the type of gain of function research that he funded, seemingly initiated. Gain of function research being to develop pathogens, essentially, that can be used as a biological weapon. And it can be argued that it was put out intentionally, or maybe it escaped from the laboratory in Wuhan, but we have documentation that Fauci's organization and National Institute of Health did provide financing for the gain of research, gain of function research rather, that was being conducted that led to the creation of the COVID-19 virus. And there, just as I was reading today, and we will read from some excerpts from the book, The Real Anthony Fauci by Robert Kennedy Jr., who discussed in one of the chapters about how one of the researchers who worked at the Wuhan laboratory had sent an email warning and expressing concern about the virus being found out about, and giving some indication that it may have indeed escaped from the laboratory. But she went on to say that that one of the components of the coronavirus was something that did not naturally occur in nature. That was something that was binding it and keeping it together. That was not something that naturally occurred, which basically meant that it is a biological agent that had to have been created in a lab. And so when that information came forth about that, there was basically a media plan to hide that information and to put forth a different narrative that would be proffered forth in the media to deflect from what actually occurred. Okay, so the reason I wanted to revisit this right now is because of the fact that there seems to be a campaign right now to scare people into going and getting some booster vaccination shots. It seems that people are kind of worn out by COVID and don't seem to be going for it, so to speak. And so the media is doing what it can to try to stir up some concern amongst the populace. So today I just noticed a few articles that have come out recently. It says the WHO, who we will, as we go deeper into the book, The Real Anthony Fauci, we will find that the WHO is heavily controlled and financed by none other than Bill Gates. It says that the WHO is closely monitoring another COVID-19 variant nicknamed Pirola. Okay, so that's supposed to, stir up, some fear, because Apparently, whatever vaccines that people have taken is not sufficient to be able to take care of this variant. There's another article, this one, okay, and that article was from ABC, dated August 19th, 2023, from ABC News. And then on July 28th of this year, CNN says your recent cold could be COVID-19 as the nation goes into a late summer wave, right? So they're saying if you have a cold, you probably actually don't have a cold, that you instead have COVID-19. So apparently nobody catches colds anymore. It's just if you're sick, you have COVID-19. You know, don't even bother getting tested. Mind you, COVID-19 is actually the cold, a common cold, or COVID rather. The coronavirus is a cold, is a common cold. COVID-19 is what has been manipulated in the lab, but based upon the coronavirus, which is a common cold. And be mindful, as we talked about before, that the tests that are used to be able to determine whether someone, a PCR test, that was the word I was looking for, the PCR test only tests antibodies. It cannot detect the existence of a coronavirus or anything else for that matter. In fact, it was the PCR test that was used when there was a so-called AIDS pandemic, and it was supposed to have been used to be able to test for the existence of HIV. But again, it cannot detect any virus. It can only detect antibodies, and it is not conclusive that the existence of antibodies is a indicator that someone has a disease. Indeed, it is the case that instead it could be and is likely a sign of a properly functioning immune system, because the antibodies is what is produced when the immune system is fighting something off. And so it does not necessarily mean that someone has a disease. And as we talked about in prior shows, we pointed out how we went to the CDC's website and read documentation that the PCR test produces up to 80% false positives. And that was the same circumstance that existed with the HIV. It was rampant in producing false positives. Okay, and that was a CNN article. And then Reuters says, could Eris, okay, this looks like another variant, different variant, COVID Eris, what to know about the new variant EG5 dominating U.S. cases, dated August 14, 2023. COVID infections and hospitalizations are on the rise in the U.S., Europe, and Asia. Health officials are pointing at the EG Eris coronavirus, a subvariant of the Omicron lineage that originally emerged November 2021. Then again, we have CNN in an article dated August 3rd, 2023. What you should know about the latest COVID-19 surge, the doctor explains. Says recent data from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention suggests that a summer surge of COVID-19 could be underway, although not as significant as in past summers. For some measures, the number of coronavirus infections is rising along with test positivity. That's kind of an interesting way of putting it. So, obviously, we see that the consciousness of the populace is being driven there's an intent to move the consciousness of the people into a fear type of vibration, much in the same way as all the hype about the hurricane that was supposed to devastate California. One day of rain, which ended up being heavy rain, but it was not certainly hurricane level, threatening civilization in Southern California. But there was a clear, desire to move people into a state of fear, because in fear, people are easily manipulated and controlled. And so, given that we see this proliferation of articles to stoke up fears about the coronavirus vaccine, the coronavirus surging, mutating, creating new variants that requires people to go out and start getting booster shots. Why is this now? Understand as well that Fauci and Bill Gates and his companies are heavily invested in Pfizer and Moderna and the other pharmaceutical companies that benefit from when these companies are profitable. And so the more that they can stir things up to get people to go out and buy or to get vaccines, that increases the demand, and they can sell more of them to the government and make more money. Okay, now I want to bring into the conversation about, okay, well, what is all this really about? Okay, why is it that people, that these people are, one, creating this biological agent and putting forth these DNA altering vaccines, which we talked about and documented. We went to Moderna's website and we read from that, despite the fact that the fact checkers, and that's another topic for conversation, that fact checkers and the media have and media doctors have all denied that the RNA drugs that were created by Pfizer and Moderna do not alter the DNA. We read from Moderna's website itself, which says that it does just that. That is a program infused into the DNA that can be changed with just like writing code. And so it's not even up for dispute as to whether or not these vaccines are have the capability of changing one's DNA, recoding one's DNA. In fact, DNA is considered to be human code. Okay, so we're going to read some, from the book. Now, one thing that's important for us to be mindful of is the fact that Bill Gates. And so, why Bill Gates? What does he have to do with health? He was the founder of Microsoft, a computer company, a computer software company, programming. What does he have to do with health? What does he know about health? How did he become an expert in health that he should be an authority about treating disease? He's not. But what we do know is that he and his father are renowned eugenicists. What is eugenics, you ask? Well, let's read the definition of eugenics. Eugenics, the study or practice of attempting to improve the human gene pool by encouraging the reproduction of people considered to have desirable traits and discouraging or preventing the reproduction of people considered to have undesirable traits. I'll read that again. Eugenics, the study or practice of attempting to improve the human gene pool by encouraging the reproduction of people considered by who? To have desirable traits, and discouraging or preventing the reproduction of people considered, again, considered by who? To have undesirable traits. How do you discourage or prevent the reproduction of people considered to have undesirable traits? Well, let's hear from the man himself. Brother Jamal, would you go ahead and play the clip of Bill Gates explaining to the people in his TED Talk, which I believe he did in 2020, where he explained what his strategy was to be able to reduce the population.
Now that's back from high school algebra, but let's take a look. First, we've got population. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, health care, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%. But there we see an increase of about 1.3. The second factor is the services we use. This encompasses everything: the food we eat, clothing, TV, heating. These are very good things. Getting rid of poverty means providing these services to almost everyone on the planet. And it's a great thing for this number to go up. In the rich world, perhaps the top 1 billion, we probably could cut back and use less. But every year, this number on average is going to go up. And so
Okay. Let's, if you would, Brother Jamal, take that back to the top. And again, because I want the listeners to clearly hear what he said, about, he said initially that there's 6.8 billion people in the world. And then he says, we can reduce that. Play it again, Brother Jamal.
I have to get pretty near to zero. That's back from high school algebra. But let's take a look. First, we've got population. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, health care, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%. But there we see an increase of about 1.3. The second factor is...
So he says if we do a really good job with vaccines and health care, we can reduce that 6.8 billion by 15%. Now, when this speech came to light, and it was put forth, and people drew the connection between his being a eugenicist, his father being a eugenicist, and brought the correlation and irony to the fact that he delivered a talk where he spoke something consistent with that philosophy, that the media and fact checkers rose to his defense, saying that that's not really what he meant by that. Well, if you read the book, The Real Anthony Fauci, you will come to learn that the fact checkers are owned and controlled by none other than Bill Gates. That's why whenever anyone speaks, posts anything on social media, whether it be YouTube, Facebook, or any other media outlet, the fact checkers will take it down. We're not providing any kind of support. They'll say it's unfactual, it's untrue, it's misleading, or whatever, providing no support for that conclusion. Is just removed. Censorship, which it's not supposed to exist in this country, but we do experience it here. Okay. Not only does Bill Gates have an influence and control over the fact checkers, he also has inordinate influence over the media. Okay, bear with me. Let me see if I can find that the section that discusses that. But in the chapter, basically what it says is that to dispel any kind of negative information about what his organization does and the adverse effects that his vaccine campaigns throughout the world have done. He has taken the step to control the media by controlling the advertising that that media outlets make their money from. Okay, and so if you go back and look into history, you'll find that Bill Gates has been involved in healthcare for some time, and his initial foray and more popular foray into healthcare was with the AIDS HIV, where he invested into some pharmaceutical companies to develop and promote AZT and another drug, which they primarily tested on Black people in the United States, Latino people, and highly in Africa and India. Okay, and so I'm reading from page 314 of the book, The Real Anthony Fauci. It says, this section is called Neutralizing the Press. Okay, and let me just read into the record here a little information, just to set this up, where I was just talking about the adverse effects of the vaccines that were forced upon African people and the effects. It says in 2000, the Gates Foundation partnered with Merck to launch a $100 million pilot program in Botswana to showcase how mass AIDS treatment with vaccines, patented antivirals, and prevention could eliminate AIDS in Africa. The pilot's disastrous failure instead became a parable for how Gates' obsession with expensive pharmaceuticals is killing Africans. The project produced no reduction in HIV rates. By 2005, the virus had spread to a quarter of all adults. All those deadly retrovirals and vaccines from Tony Fauci's little shop of horrors exacted a fearsome toll on Botswana's mothers and infants. The rate of pregnancy-related maternal deaths nearly quadrupled, and child mortality rose dramatically. Health economist Dean Jameson, formerly editor of the Gates Foundation-funded reference book, Disease Control Priorities in Developing Countries, acknowledged that the Gates Foundation's narrow obsession with AIDS drugs may have accelerated death and illness in Botswana by drawing the nation's top medical professionals away from primary care and child health. They have an opportunity to double or triple their salaries by working on AIDS. Jameson said maybe the health ministry replaces them when they leave the government service and maybe not. So he's referring to healthcare workers in Africa have abandoned the clinics that they are working in order to go and work for the Gates Foundation because they pay much more. It says the Gates Foundation has poured billions into sub-Saharan Africa through the Global Fund to finance vaccines and antivirals for AIDS and TB treatment for 19 million people. But one AIDS patient, Maleko, told the Times, the clinics don't have what we need: food. He goes on to say, Mahabile Mathibeli, the nurse at Queen 2 Hospital who gives Moleko her pills, wept in frustration as she told the Times that 4 out of 5 of her patients ate fewer than 3 meals a day. Most of them are dying of hunger. It says, Dr. Jennifer Futon, the Lesotho director for Partners in Health, a Boston-based NGO, made a similar complaint. By giving African patients medicine without food, she said, you're consigning that person to death because they are poor. Okay, so the gist of that is that the health conditions in Africa would be better served by providing people with food and nutrition, sanitation, because the primary impediment to the health of the people is the lack of food and unsanitary conditions, unsanitary water. Right? So, but they're not providing that. Their so-called solution is drugs, vaccines. But we just heard what Bill Gates said about the purpose of the vaccines for him. Okay. Goes on to say in his book, The White Man's Burden, economist William Easterly, who conducts the Development Research Institute at New York University, asks, who chose the human right of universal treatment of AIDS over other human rights? The answer to that question, of course, is Bill Gates. Bill Gates' continent-wide experiment on the African population is a long, tragic joke. The Times reporters deliver its devastating punchline in their analysis of the activities of Bill Gates' organizations, which include the Gates Foundation and an organization called Gavi. Says the Time reporters delivers its devastating punchline saying 2006 data, the most recent available, shows a paradoxical relationship between Gavi funding in Africa and child mortality. Overall, child mortality improved more often in the nations that receive smaller than average Gavi grants per capita. In 7 nations that receive greater than average funding, child mortality rates worsened. The authors of that article in the Times, names were Pillar and Smith. And their expose says, Pillar and Smith's Los Angeles Times expose in Gates' calamitous African adventure is an artifact of an expired era. Investigative journalism of this probative quality is a quaint relic of a time when editors and producers still permitted their reporters and correspondents to express skepticism toward Gates. Even before the open censorship of the COVID epoch that we currently live in, U.S. media reports about Gates' charities operated in a narrow range between obsequious fawning and adulation. That is not by accident. By 2006, the tsunami of advertising revenues from pharmaceutical firms, about $4.8 billion annually at that time, had already drowned out most of the voices of vaccine dissent in mainstream media. By 2020, those expenditures grew to $9.53 billion. After the devastating Los Angeles Times piece, Gates moved aggressively to neutralize the once independent press with compromising grants that struggling news organizations couldn't refuse. In August 2020 expose by Tim Schwab in the Columbia Journalism Review showed how Gates dispensed at least $250 billion in grants to media outlets, including NPR, PBS, Public Television, The Guardian, The Independent, BBC, Al Jazeera, ProPublica, The Daily Telegraph, The Atlantic, The Texas Tribune, Gannett, Washington Monthly, Le Monde, the Financial Times, the National Journal, Univision, which is a Mexican station, Medium, and the New York Times to dampen journalists' appetites for, well, journalism. In fact, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation finances the Guardian's entire global development section. That shrewd investment presumably earned the couple the February 14, 2017 Guardian headline, How Bill and Melinda Gates Helped Over 122 Million Lives, helped save 122 million lives. It says the foundation has also invested millions in journalism training and in researching effective ways of crafting media narratives to support Gates's global ambition. Gates, for example, gave grants totaling $1.5 million from 2015 to 2019 to the Center for Investigative Reporting, apparently to discourage investigative reporting. That's why we can't get any good information by researching the news unless you just happen to come upon something like I did with the who was that? Newsweek. With the Newsweek article where I found out about the what was it? 15 million in funds that Fauci's National Institute of Health, I think it was 14 million, sent to Wuhan to do the research to create they ended up creating the coronavirus. Okay, and just as I've said before, Gates has also made large strategic investments in Poynter and the international network of fact-checking organizations, which dutifully debunks virtually every public statement that seems critical of Gates, whether accurate or not. Okay, so I wanted to read that into the record so we understand when anyone, including very well-known and very credible doctors or scientists who say anything contrary to the narrative that Gates and Fauci want to put forth about the coronavirus, about the vaccines, that it is quickly debunked. They're shut down. They're not given the opportunity to speak. They're censored. And that's why, because they're controlled by the money that has been invested into the advertisements, which basically gives them control over any kind of stories that are put forth by the media. And I don't need to tell you about how fact checkers influence the social media information. Okay, so I do want to read a little bit into the record about Gates and how he controls the World Health Organization. This is from page 300 in the Real F. Anthony Fauci book, again written by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. On page 300 it says, how Gates controls the WHO. Worse, Gates has used his money strategically to infect the international aid agencies with his distorted self-serving priorities. The United States historically has been the largest donor to the WHO with a contribution of $604.2 million in 2018 through 2019, the last years for which numbers were available. That year, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation gave $431.3 million, and Gavi, which is also controlled by Gates, gave $316.5 million. So that's a total of over about $750 million. Plus, Gates also routes funding to the WHO through SAGE and UNICEF and Rotary International, bringing his cumulative total contributions to over $1 billion, making Gates the unofficial top sponsor of the WHO, even before the Trump administration's 2020 move to cut all of his support to the organizations. And his means the government when Trump was president. He cut donations to the WHO from the United States. Okay, those $1 billion tax-deductible donations gave Gates leverage and control over WHO's $5.6 billion budget and over international health policy, which he largely directs to serve the profit interests of his pharmaceutical partners. Pharmaceutical companies cement WHO's institutional bias towards vaccines with approximately $70 million of their own direct contributions. Our priorities are your priorities, Gates declared in 2011. Okay. He goes on to say Gates' vaccine obsession has diverted WHO from giving away poverty alleviation, nutrition, and clean water to make vaccine uptake his preeminent public health metric. Okay, as I said before, the problems that are rampant in Africa and India, for that matter, have been lack of sanitary conditions, lack of food, nutrition, and clean water. But all of the funds in the WHO have been used and diverted into Gates' vaccine program, which we heard him say is meant to reduce the population from 6.8 billion by 15%. Okay, so he goes on to say, Gates is not afraid to throw his weight around. In 2011, Gates spoke at the WHO, ordering that all 193 member states, you must make vaccines a central focus of your health systems. The following year, the World Health Assembly, which sets the WHO's agenda, adopted a global vaccine plan that the Gates Foundation co-authored. Over half of WHO's total budget now goes to vaccines. That narrow focus on inoculations is deepening Africa's health crisis, according to global health experts and African officials. The control of several $billion in annual inputs gives Gates and Fauci effective control over not only the WHO, but also the runway of authoritative quasi-government agencies that Gates, often with Fauci's assistance and support, created and or funded, including CEPI, Gavi, GAVI, PATH, UNITAID, UNICEF, SAGE, the Global Development Program, the Global Fund, the Brighton Collaboration, and government health ministries in dozens of African nations that are largely dependent on the WHO and global health partnerships. Okay, so the book goes on to talk about how devastating the different vaccination programs and testing programs that have been initiated by Gates and Fauci have caused devastating deaths. Because one of the things that the book points out is that the clinical trials that are conducted, particularly if they were initially conducted in the United States, and the FDA, which is also heavily controlled by Gates and Fauci primarily. If the studies that they do, and mind you, the studies that the FDA does and the National Institute of Health do now, because they are so controlled by the pharmaceutical industry, are not valid tests. A valid test typically involves testing the proposed drug with a placebo. But when Fauci and his people test, they don't use a true placebo, and so the test is skewed. And typically, any drug, particularly ones that Fauci and the people who work at the NIH, because they are not prohibited from investing in the drugs that they're testing, which is a conflict of interest in any other government agency, but they're not prohibited from profiting from it. In fact, they partner with pharmaceutical companies to develop drugs, and they have a financial interest in their success. So naturally, they'll pass the test, and they skew the test so that they do pass. That's why we see so often that drugs, after they've been FDA approved, end up resulting in severe side effects, which end up resulting in some lawsuits. It ends up having them pulled off the market because of the severe toxicity that they create and the damaging health effects that they've had. But they have been FDA approved. Okay, but then they end up later having to be pulled off the market. Okay, and so you read this book, it explains why that is the case and how it is that these agencies that are supposed to be protecting the health of our people are not doing that. They're protecting the interests of the pharmaceutical companies. Okay, and so I'll read from page 329 of the book. It says, population and sterilization vaccines. And this is just one of the examples that's identified here in the book. Yeah, I'm going to read from, instead, page 324, then I'll get back to that one. Okay, so it says, Bill and Tony's African Safari. It says, in the colonial era, Africa provided model precincts for testing new vaccines. In the 1950s, white colonial overlords rolled out the red carpet for pharmaceutical companies to perform vaccine experiments on compliant test subjects numbering in the millions. Drug companies spend some 90% of their drug development costs on phase 3 human trials. Every trial delay eats into the critical time period when the product enjoys patent protection. In the 1980s, pharma therefore moved most of its clinical trials to poor nations where human guinea pigs are cheap and even the most severe injuries will rarely delay study. Government complicity and anemic corporate liability laws allow vaccine makers to write off injuries as collateral damage with little consequence or accountability. Today, pharma still regards Africa as the beau ideal to test immunizations and as a lucrative receptacle for dumping expired and defective stocks. Bill Gates has played a key role in legitimizing this arrangement while collaborating with captors of corrupt WHO officials who scam Western donor nations into footing the bill and guaranteeing rich profits for pharmaceutical companies, which coincidentally he holds hefty stock positions. Gates, the biggest funder of vaccines in the world, is heavily invested in lucrative partnerships with almost all of the world's largest vaccine companies. Bill and Melinda Gates have continued the tradition of human experimentation in Africa, with the WHO stepping nearly into the role of an enabling colonial vassal. Following the colonial era, most of Africa's new nationalist governments consider healthcare a national priority, and many of them developed model health programs for their populations. During the 70s, the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, initiated austerity policies that bankrupted the best of these programs and left African nations almost entirely dependent on the WHO to finance national health ministries and vital HIV programs. Using the control of the flow of international assistance, WHO exerts discipline, rewards compliance, and punishes resistance to pharma's African ambitions. The WHO uses its funding power to bully African governments that slack on vaccine uptake. Gates' pervasive control over the WHO has made Africa his fiefdom. The continent's populations have become his guinea pigs. Vaccines for Bill Gates are strategic philanthropy that feed his many vaccine-related businesses and give him dictatorial control over global health policies affecting millions of lives. Okay, and I'll go back to page 329, which says population and sterilization vaccines. Early 20th century America saw snowballing popularity of eugenics, which we just talked about at the beginning. A racist pseudoscience that aspired to eliminate human beings deemed unfit in favor of the Nordic stereotypes. So when we read the definition, where it said the study or practice of attempting to improve the human gene pool by encouraging the reproduction of people considered to have desirable traits. The desirable trait is the Nordic stereotypes, euphemistically known as white people. Okay, so this goes on to say 27 state governments enshrine elements of this philosophy as official policy by enacting forced sterilization and segregation laws and marriage restrictions. In 1909, California became the third state to adopt laws requiring sterilization of intellectually challenged Americans. Ultimately, eugenics practitioners coercively sterilized some 60,000 Americans. John D. Rockefeller Jr.'s keen interest in eugenics colored his passion for population control. The old Baron's scion joined the American Eugenics Society and served as trustee of the Bureau of Social Science. The Rockefeller Foundation, and those of you who follow Brother Steve Coakley would know about the Rockefeller Foundation and its connections. The Rockefeller Foundation dispatched hefty donations in the 1920s and early 1930s to hundreds of German researchers, including those conducting Hitler's notorious twin studies at the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Anthropology. He goes on to say, in the early 1950s, the Rockefeller Foundation conducted fertility studies in India that historian Matthew Connolly characterizes as an example of American social science at its most hubristic. He says in one of the collaborations with the Harvard School of Public Health and India's Ministry of Health, the Rockefeller Foundation studied 8,000 tribal people in 7 villages in the Kama section of the Punjab to determine whether contraceptive tablets could dramatically reduce fertility rates. The villagers were treated like lab specimens, subjected to monthly questioning but otherwise ignored. Rockefeller's researchers did not initially inform the Punjabis that their pills would prevent women from bearing children. Magui describes the villagers as shocked, dismayed, and resentful to learn that the medication that they credulously consumed was intended to render them infertile. One is reminded of the Tuskegee experiment that was done on black men without informing them that they were being injected with the syphilis. And mind you, that is part of the reason that black people have not been keen to take the current vaccines and their boosters. And that's why there has been such a concerted effort to target the black population because of that resistance. And we did take note of the fact that in part of that campaign, they recruited Hank Aaron to go out and publicly take the vaccine to show black people that it was safe. And a week later, he died. And it says Gates's Foundation for Reducing Populations is a family pedigree. His father, Bill Gates Sr., was a prominent corporate lawyer and civic leader in Seattle with a lifelong obsession for population control. Gates Sr. sat on the national board of Planned Parenthood, a neo-progressive organization founded in 1916 by the racist eugenicist Margaret Sanger to promote birth control and sterilization and to purge human waste and create a race of thoroughbreds. Sanger said she hoped to purify the gene pool by eliminating the unfit persons with disabilities, preventing such persons from reproducing by surgical sterilization or other means. In 1939, Sanger created and directed the racist Negro Project. Now, mind you, again, this Margaret Sanger is the founder of Planned Parenthood, which operates in what community? So it says, in 1939, Sanger created and directed the racist Negro Project, which strategically co-opted black ministers. I'll read that again. In 1939, Sanger created and directed the racist Negro Project, which strategically co-opted black ministers in leadership roles to promote contraceptives to their congregations. Sanger stated in a letter to her eugenicist colleague, Clarence Gamble of Procter & Gamble, we do not want word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population. And the minister is the man who can straighten out that idea if it ever occurs to any of their more rebellious members. Now, think back to the pandemic and when it became evident that Black people were resisting going to take vaccines, who did the media start trotting out in front of the cameras, and what were the ministers saying to their congregations? Were they not encouraging their congregations to go and take the vaccine? Is that inconsistent with what I just read here? And, we'll read that statement again from Bill Gates. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, which we just talked about, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%. Okay, and remember, if we go and look for that, you see, if you go look for it now on the internet, you'll see a whole bunch of articles where it said, well, he didn't really mean that. What he really meant was this. Those are the fact checkers, which we just read into the record, are Gates subsidized and controlled. Okay, so we've taken up a lot of time. I didn't know we had gone this long, but this is actually going to be a little bit of a series, because I'm going to go into this book because it has a lot of information that we as Black people here, and those of us who are concerned about our people in the diaspora, particularly in Africa, need to know how our people are being used as human guinea pigs, and by someone who has stated his clear purpose is in reducing population. And so we have that from his own mouth. I trust what he says in that regard. Okay, so I want to go ahead and end it here. We'll revisit this book in a future show. And again, I want to bring these things to you, not to scare you, but to let you know and be aware of what's going on here, and to encourage you to engage in your spiritual practices, though, so that you don't get caught up in things emotionally, to where these things disturb your sleep. But we need to know the truth, and that enables us to be able to better navigate through this human drama. And but if you do end up shaken by some of this information and by the things that we're going through, do please reach out to me. I can help you and show you some things that you can do in order to put yourself in a better position to be able to cope with the circumstances, and if these going through stress or can't sleep and those type of things, I can help you. I can help you with that. So do reach out to me. You can reach out to me on Facebook, I'm Sarah, or you can go to my website, www.sa-ra.org. So with that, thank you for listening. I hope you found this to be beneficial. I do encourage you to pick up the book, The Real Anthony Fauci, by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And we look forward to talking to you again here on Journey in the South. Hotel.